My girlfriend said, "Stop checking my location, it's controlling." I said, "Okay, I'll stop." I didn't argue, didn't question. I just let her have her freedom. A few nights later, that same freedom led her straight into someone else's arms. I remember the night she told me to stop checking her location. It wasn't a fight. Not really. More like the kind of conversation that starts in low tones, with too many pauses, where both people already know the ending, but pretend they don't. We were sitting in her apartment, a small one-bedroom on the east side, warm lights, half-empty wine glasses, the sound of the city spilling faintly through the cracked window, the kind of evening that felt almost too still. Enjoying the story? Give us a thumbs up, share this video, and join our family by subscribing now. She was leaning against the counter, her phone face down beside the sink, and she said it so softly I almost missed it. "Stop checking my location, it's controlling." There was a pause after that, long enough for me to feel my pulse rise, slow and steady, like a ticking clock behind my ribs. I didn't argue, didn't ask why. I just nodded, said, "Okay," and went back to swirling what was left of my wine, pretending that the taste hadn't turned sour. That was our rhythm lately, silence disguised as understanding. We'd been together for nearly 3 years, the kind of 3 years that felt longer, like they stretched through different versions of ourselves. The early days of infatuation, the slow drift into routine, the quiet questions that start to form in the spaces between text messages and missed calls. Her name was Claire, and I loved her the way a drowning man loves air, desperately, selfishly, without perspective. I used to think love was about closeness. Now I know it's mostly about distance, the kind that creeps in without you noticing until it's everywhere, and you can't remember when it started. After she said it, she turned away, pretending to check something on her phone. I caught my reflection in the window behind her, a faint, distorted shape. I looked small, unsure. I remember thinking that she didn't sound angry. She sounded tired, like she'd rehearsed it, like she was saying what she needed to say to close a door. So I let her have her freedom. I deleted the location tracker. I didn't check her Instagram stories, didn't text her to ask where she was when she didn't reply for hours. I told myself it was trust, that this was healthy, that if I gave her space, she'd fill it with me again. But that's the thing about space. Once you give it, you realize how much room there is for someone else to step in. The first few days felt strange, like I'd unlearned a habit. I'd wake up and instinctively reach for my phone, half expecting to see the little pin on the map, the comfort of knowing she was home, or at work, or anywhere that wasn't unknown. But it was gone. Just an empty screen, and a silence that felt heavier than it should. We still saw each other, but something shifted. Her texts came later, shorter. Her laugh, the one that used to come easily, started to sound like it was trying too hard, and she'd say things like, "You've been quiet lately," as if she didn't know why. I started noticing the little details, how she'd keep her phone screen angled away from me, how she'd come home with her hair slightly different, like she'd fixed it in someone else's mirror, how she started using perfume again, the same one she wore when we first met. You tell yourself it's nothing. You always do, at first. One night, we were watching a movie, something she'd picked, something slow and romantic, but she wasn't watching it. She was scrolling, smiling at something on her phone. When I asked what it was, she said, "Just a meme." Then she turned the screen away. I didn't push. I'd already promised not to be controlling. Still, my mind kept replaying her words, "Stop checking my location." And beneath them, something unspoken. Something like, "Stop noticing me." That night, when she fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her breathing was soft, steady. Her phone glowed faintly on the nightstand. I told myself not to look, but curiosity is a kind of hunger. It eats at you slowly until it becomes unbearable. I reached for it. My hand hovered above the screen for a moment, trembling slightly. I wasn't looking for messages. I just wanted to see something. Proof that my paranoia was just that, paranoia. But the screen was locked. A new passcode. She'd changed it. I felt something twist inside me. Not rage exactly. More like realization. Quiet, cold, inevitable. The next morning she left early. Said she had errands to run. Her voice was light, distracted. She kissed me goodbye, but it felt rehearsed, like a line she'd delivered too many times. When the door closed, I sat there in the silence, feeling the air she left behind. That's when I opened my laptop. There was a folder on my desktop labeled Security. It wasn't what it sounded like, just some old software I'd used for work, a small tracking app meant for logistics. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't exactly ethical either. I'd used it before, years ago, for a client who needed to monitor delivery routes. It didn't require location sharing, just a single login session from a device. I stared at it for a long time, my hand hovering over the trackpad. I told myself I wasn't going to use it, that I was better than that. But trust, once fractured, doesn't heal with restraint. It festers with imagination. That night, she texted that she'd be out with friends. No problem, I wrote back. Have fun. A small, perfect lie. When she left, I watched her car disappear down the street. Then I opened the app. The screen blinked, connected, and there it was, a small blinking dot. Downtown, near the river. I told myself she was meeting friends for drinks, the kind of thing she used to do before she met me. But then the dot moved, slowed, stopped. An apartment building. I waited, watching. Minutes passed. The dot didn't move again. I sat there in the dark, the hum of my computer fan the only sound. My throat was dry, my hands cold. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come as a shock. Sometimes it's more like confirmation, the quiet click of a puzzle piece, fitting where it always belonged. I closed the laptop, poured another drink, told myself it didn't matter, that she was her own person, free to make her own choices. But that night I didn't sleep. When she came back the next morning, she smelled different. Not of perfume, of someone else's air. She smiled, asked if I'd eaten. Her voice was casual, her eyes too steady. "Good night," I asked. She hesitated just a fraction too long. "Yeah, it was fine." "Who was there?" "Just friends." I nodded, pretending to believe her. She walked into the bathroom, humming something under her breath. The sound echoed off the tiles, fragile and bright, like it didn't belong in the same room as me. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Something quiet, but irreversible. I realized I didn't want to catch her lying. I wanted to understand why. So I started watching, not obsessively, not yet, just noticing, keeping track. The little inconsistencies, the new habits, the gaps in her stories. Every detail became a thread, and I started pulling carefully, quietly. The next weekend, she said she was meeting her friend Lauren. I smiled, nodded, told her to say hi for me. Then I waited until she left, checked the app, and saw the dot moving again. Not toward Lauren's place, but back downtown. The same building. I don't know what I expected to feel. Anger, maybe, or heartbreak. But what I felt instead was calm. A strange, detached calm, like I'd already been here before. I drove downtown, parked a few streets away, walked. The city was quiet that night. Rain-slicked sidewalks, reflections bending in puddles, the hum of distant traffic. The building wasn't fancy, but it was new. Brick facade, modern fixtures, too clean to feel real. I stood across the street, staring up at the windows. 4th floor. One of them was lit. I saw a shadow move. 2, actually. Then the curtain fell shut. That's when the calm cracked. It wasn't rage. Not yet. Just the sharp edge of reality, cutting through denial. I stayed there longer than I should have, until my legs felt numb and my throat ached from holding my breath. Then I turned around and walked away. By the time I got home, the rain had stopped. The apartment was silent. Her jacket still hung on the chair, her mug still on the counter. The kind of details that make you realize how much of your life exists in someone else's presence. When she came back hours later, she didn't look surprised to see me awake, just tired. Her makeup was gone, but there were faint traces of mascara smudged near her eyes. She smiled, soft, almost apologetic. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, full of unsaid things. Then she said something that felt rehearsed, gentle but distant. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I looked at her for a long time. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to scream, to accuse, to make her tell me the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I just said, "Yeah, I'm fine." Because that's what people do when they realize love isn't mutual anymore. They play along until the silence feels like safety. That night, I lay in bed beside her, listening to her breathe, counting the spaces between each inhale and exhale, trying to remember when love turned into observation. In the dark, I whispered, almost to myself, "I'm not checking your location anymore." She stirred, half asleep. "Good," she murmured. "That's good." Her hand brushed against mine. It was warm, soft, familiar. But it didn't feel like connection. It felt like the ghost of something that used to mean everything. And I realized for the first time that letting go wasn't freedom, it was surrender. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the ceiling change colors with the city lights slipping through the blinds, orange, then blue, then gray. Each hour that passed was a reminder that I was still there, still pretending everything was fine. When dawn came, she was still asleep, curled up beside me, her hair spilling over her pillow, peaceful, beautiful even. But beauty is cruel when you know it's no longer yours. I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city wake up. Down on the street, people walked their dogs, jogged, hailed cabs, strangers living lives I'd never know. It felt almost insulting how easily the world moved on while I was still trying to make sense of mine. When Claire woke, she stretched and smiled like nothing had happened. She wrapped her arms around me from behind, kissed the back of my neck, and said, "You were up early." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Couldn't sleep." She poured herself coffee, humming. That same hum, that same lightness that used to make me feel at home, now making my stomach twist. I watched her move around the kitchen, effortless, natural. It struck me how much routine hides, how easy it is to live inside repetition and call it stability. When she left for work, she kissed me goodbye again. The door clicked shut, and the apartment fell silent. I stared at that door for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. The app still showed her location. I told myself it was just curiosity. Closure, maybe. But curiosity isn't harmless. It's the first step toward confession, the kind you can't ever take back. Her dot was at her office, normal. She worked as a copy editor for a marketing firm downtown. Nothing glamorous, but she liked it. Or at least she said she did. Around noon, I checked again. The dot hadn't moved. Consistent, predictable, safe. But later, around 5, it shifted. Not toward home, toward that same building near the river. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to close the laptop. I really did, but instead, I grabbed my keys. The city looked different this time. The rain from the night before had dried, leaving the air crisp, the streets bright with reflection. Every sound, footsteps, distant sirens, laughter spilling from bars, felt louder, sharper, like the world was aware of what I was doing. I parked a block away, walked, slowly. Each step felt heavy. I told myself I wasn't going to confront her, just to see, to confirm what I already knew. When I reached the building, the lobby light flickered faintly, casting long, thin shadows across the tiled floor. A security guard sat behind a desk, eyes half closed, radio murmuring quietly. I didn't go in. I just stood outside, watching the elevator numbers rise and stop, 4th floor again. I stared up, tracing the shape of the building with my eyes. One window glowed faintly behind half-closed curtains. A figure moved past it. Then another. I turned away. My reflection in the glass door looked pale, unrecognizable. I wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear it. Instead, I went home. The drive back was quiet, except for the faint hum of the engine. My thoughts moved in circles, fragments of conversations, her laughter, her touch, all overlapping with images of her with someone else. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt hollow. Not broken, just emptied. When she came home later, it was past midnight. She looked startled to see me awake. "Hey," she said softly. "You're up." "Yeah, couldn't sleep." Her smile was careful. Her hands fidgeted with her keys. "Long night?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Work dinner ran late." I nodded. "Didn't know your office did dinners on Sundays." That made her pause. Just a fraction of a second, but enough. Then she laughed. "It wasn't official, just a few of us grabbing drinks." "Right," I said. She moved past me, her perfume lingering faintly in the air. I watched her walk down the hall, the sound of her heels tapping softly on the wood floor. When she turned to look at me, her face was unreadable. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." She smiled again, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached her eyes. It was the kind you give someone when you're already halfway out the door. She disappeared into the bathroom, and I heard the shower start. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor, and whispered under my breath, "You're lying." The sound of running water filled the silence. That's when I noticed her phone, left on the counter, face down, charging. I stared at it. My heart started to pound. I knew the passcode had changed, but part of me hoped I could guess it. Maybe she'd reused an old one, or something familiar. I picked it up. The screen lit up, asking for the code. 4 digits. I tried the date we met. Denied. Her birthday. Denied. My birthday. Denied. On the fourth attempt, I stopped because I realized something. She hadn't just changed the passcode. She wanted me to know she had. It was deliberate. A message without words. I set the phone back down and stepped away. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, her skin still damp, she looked at me and said, "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She smiled faintly, kissed my cheek, and went to bed. I stood there for a long time, listening to her settle in, her breathing steadying as she drifted to sleep. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at nothing, and realized I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was angry at myself for pretending I didn't already see it coming. The days that followed were quieter. We fell into a routine, polite conversations, half-hearted meals, the illusion of normalcy. But there was a tension under everything, like the air between us was charged. I stopped tracking her, or at least I told myself I did. I wanted to see if she'd notice, if maybe she'd miss the feeling of being watched. She didn't. If anything, she seemed lighter, happier. One evening I found her sitting on the couch, smiling at her phone, the kind of smile that used to be mine. "Something funny?" I asked. She glanced up quickly, almost startled. "Yeah, just a video." Her tone was casual, too casual. I nodded, pretending not to care. But inside, I felt that same quiet ache, the one that comes when you realize you've become an observer in your own life. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I went to the balcony. The city stretched out beneath me, lights blinking, windows glowing, people moving through their private worlds. And I thought about how easy it is to lose someone without them ever really leaving. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my friend Michael. He was one of those friends you only reach out to when things are falling apart, because he's blunt enough to tell you what you don't want to hear. When we met at a bar that evening, he took one look at me and said, "You look like shit." "Good to see you too," I muttered. He ordered beers, leaned back, and studied me. "So, what's going on?" I hesitated, then said, "Claire's been distant." "Distant how?" "Different, secretive. She doesn't tell me where she's going anymore. Changed her phone passcode. Comes home late." He frowned. "And you're tracking her?" I looked down. "I was. Not anymore." "Jesus, man," he sighed. "That's not healthy." "I know. But," I looked up at him, I need to know. If she's seeing someone, if I'm wasting my time." Michael didn't answer for a while. Then he said, "You already know." I didn't respond. He leaned forward. "Listen, if you think she's cheating, confront her. Don't play detective. That's a game you don't win." I nodded, but I didn't mean it, because confronting her meant losing her, and I wasn't ready for that. When I got home, she was there, sitting on the couch, reading. She looked up when I walked in, smiled faintly. "Hey, you were out late." "Yeah," I said. "Met Michael." Her smile faded slightly. "Oh, how's he?" "Fine." The silence stretched. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah." She nodded slowly, then went back to her book. It should have been normal, a quiet night at home. But it wasn't. It felt staged, like both of us were playing roles we'd rehearsed too well. Later, I caught her standing by the window, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering. When she noticed me, she hung up quickly. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just Lauren." "You sure?" Her eyes flashed, the first real emotion I'd seen in days. "Yes, I'm sure. Why do you keep asking?" "Because you keep lying." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then she said quietly, "You don't trust me anymore." I looked at her. "Should I?" She didn't answer. She just turned away, walking toward the bedroom. I heard her whisper something under her breath. Maybe my name, maybe nothing. I stood there, staring at the empty hallway, and realized we'd crossed a line we couldn't come back from. The next day, she didn't come home. No text, no call, just silence. I tried not to check. I really did. But by midnight, I opened the app again. The dot appeared instantly. Same building, same floor. I stared at it until the lines on the map blurred. Then, slowly, something inside me broke. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. The kind that comes when you stop lying to yourself. I grabbed my coat and left. The night air was cold, sharp. The streets were mostly empty, just the hum of distant traffic and the flicker of streetlights. When I reached the building, I didn't stay across the street this time. I walked up to the door, buzzed the intercom, and waited. No answer. I buzzed again. Then again. Finally, someone came out, a man, maybe in his 50s, holding a bag of groceries. I caught the door before it closed. "Thanks," I said quickly, slipping inside. The elevator was slow. Too slow. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. 4th floor. When the doors opened, the hallway was silent. I walked slowly, counting door numbers. The air smelled faintly of detergent and something floral. Then I stopped. Apartment 4B. I listened. Faint music. Laughter. My hand hovered over the door. I didn't know what I'd do if she answered, or if he did. I raised my hand and froze, because suddenly I didn't want to know anymore. I turned to leave. That's when the door opened, and she was there. Claire. Her eyes went wide. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, "What are you doing here?" I stared at her, at the way her hair was slightly messy, her lipstick faintly smudged. "I wanted to see you," I said quietly. Her voice trembled. "You can't be here." Behind her I saw movement, a man's shadow crossing the room. My chest tightened. "Who is he?" I asked. She didn't answer, just closed the door halfway, her eyes shining with something like fear. "Go home," she whispered. "Please." The door clicked shut, and I just stood there, staring at it. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly around me. My reflection shimmered faintly in the brass number plate. I walked back to the elevator, each step heavier than the last. When the doors closed, I saw her silhouette through the small window, standing there, still watching me. The ride down in the elevator felt endless. Each floor that passed was like a reminder of how far I'd fallen. Not physically, but emotionally. The kind of descent you don't notice until you hit the bottom. When the doors opened, the lobby was empty. The security guard was gone this time, his chair turned slightly, a radio still humming static on the counter. I walked past it, my footsteps echoing. The air felt heavier than before, like even the building knew what I'd just seen. Outside, the night had grown colder. A thin fog drifted over the river, swallowing the glow of the streetlights. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, staring up at the building. Her window was dark now, curtains drawn. She hadn't called after me, hadn't run after me. She just let me leave. That was what broke me. Not the lie, not the betrayal, the indifference. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence was safer. When I pulled into the driveway, the sky was already starting to pale. I sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, trying to feel something, anger, sadness, anything. But I was empty, just tired. Inside, the apartment felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean. Her things were still everywhere. The jacket on the chair, the half-read book on the table, the toothbrush beside mine. I should have thrown them out. Instead, I just stood there, looking at all of it, like maybe the things she left behind would start explaining themselves. I slept for a few hours, or maybe I just closed my eyes and waited for morning to come. When I woke, the first thing I did was check my phone. No messages. At noon, I texted her, "We need to talk." An hour passed. Nothing. Then another. Finally a reply. "Not today." 2 words. No apology. No explanation. I stared at the screen, reading it over and over until the letters blurred. That was Monday. By Wednesday, she still hadn't come home. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Michael. I couldn't stand the thought of saying it out loud, of admitting I'd been right, that she was gone and maybe she'd been gone for a while. But on Thursday morning, she texted again. "Can we meet tomorrow?" I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Relief, maybe, or dread. "Where?" I typed back. "The cafe on 5th, noon." I didn't sleep that night either. The cafe was one of those quiet ones tucked between old bookstores and antique shops, the kind of place you go when you want to disappear. We'd been there before, early in our relationship. I remember her laughing, stirring sugar into her coffee, telling me about her childhood like it was a story she'd never told anyone before. This time, she was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around her cup, staring out at the street. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. It wasn't the smile I'd fallen in love with. It was smaller, weaker. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." I sat across from her. The silence between us felt like a third person sitting at the table. She looked tired. Her eyes were shadowed, her hair pulled back carelessly. She wasn't wearing makeup. For a moment I wondered if the man from that apartment had ever seen her like this, stripped of performance, vulnerable. "I'm sorry," she said finally. Her voice trembled slightly. "For everything." "Everything," I repeated. "That covers a lot." She looked down. "I didn't mean for it to get like this." "Like what?" Her eyes lifted to meet mine. "Complicated." I almost laughed. "Complicated is when you forget an anniversary, not when you're sleeping with someone else." She flinched, but didn't argue. "I didn't plan it. It just happened." Right, I said, leaning back. Things just happen. You trip and fall into someone else's bed. Her eyes filled with tears. I know I hurt you. I know I broke something I can't fix. But I need you to understand, it wasn't about you. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, she said quietly. It's just the truth. I wanted to hate her in that moment, really hate her. But looking at her, I realized I couldn't, because part of me still loved her. And that was the worst part, loving someone who'd already stopped loving you back. How long? I asked. She hesitated. A few months. My stomach sank. And you were going to tell me when? I tried, she said. That night, when I told you to stop checking my location, I was trying to make space, to end it slowly. End it slowly, I repeated, shaking my head. You were ending it while still sleeping in my bed. She looked away. I didn't know how to let go. For a while, neither of us spoke. The hum of the cafe filled the silence, coffee cups clinking, a soft song playing somewhere behind the counter. Finally, she said, "His name is Daniel." I closed my eyes. "Don't. I'm not trying to hurt you," she whispered. "You deserve to know." "Do I?" I asked. "Because right now it feels like knowing is the last thing I want." She nodded slowly. "You're right." We sat there in silence. The distance between us felt immeasurable, even though the table was small enough for our hands to touch, if either of us had tried. "I'm moving out," she said after a while. "Tomorrow. I've already found a place." I nodded. "So that's it." She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. I don't want to fight anymore. I wanted to scream, to tell her that she didn't get to choose peace after chaos. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the condensation sliding down my coffee cup, and said, "Okay." She blinked, surprised. "Okay?" "Yeah," I said. "You're right. No more fighting." She exhaled, relieved and broken at the same time. "Thank you." When she stood to leave, I didn't. I watched her walk out, the bell above the door ringing softly. That sound stayed with me long after she was gone. That night, I packed her things, folded her clothes, boxed her books, emptied the bathroom cabinet. I didn't cry. I didn't even think much. Just moved methodically, like I was cleaning up after a storm. When I reached the drawer beside her bed, I found a small black notebook. Plain cover, elastic strap. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were pages of notes, fragments of thoughts, journal entries, lists. Most of it was ordinary, grocery items, reminders, work deadlines, but then I found something else. A page dated 2 months ago. "He's starting to notice. I can't keep lying, but I'm scared of what he'll do if I tell him." My hands went cold. I read it again, slower this time. The words blurred together. What I'll do. It felt like being accused of something I hadn't done, or maybe something I hadn't done yet. There were other entries, short, clipped sentences. "He checks my phone when I'm in the shower. I changed the passcode today. He didn't like that. Sometimes I feel like he's waiting for me to slip." Each word felt like a blade pressed against my skin. I wanted to tell myself it wasn't true, that she was exaggerating, projecting, twisting things. But somewhere deep down, I knew she wasn't. She'd been scared of me. I closed the notebook slowly, my reflection warping in the glossy cover. For the first time, I wondered if I'd become the very thing she was trying to escape. The next morning, she came to pack the rest. I helped her carry boxes to her car. We didn't talk much. Every sentence felt unnecessary now. When we loaded the last one, she turned to me and said softly, "I never wanted to hurt you." "You did anyway." She nodded. "I know." We stood there for a long moment, both waiting for the other to say something that would make it easier. Neither of us did. Finally she said, "Goodbye, Evan." That was the first time she'd said my name all week. I didn't answer. She got in her car, started the engine, and drove away. I watched until the taillights disappeared. Then I went back inside. The apartment looked smaller. The air felt different, emptier, cleaner. I sat down on the couch, surrounded by the ghost of our life together, and let the silence settle. For a while, I thought that was the end. But endings aren't clean. They echo. They linger. The first echo came a week later. I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw her, across the street, outside a cafe, laughing, her head tilted back, eyes bright. Daniel was with her. I didn't need to ask. They looked happy, effortlessly happy. I froze, half hidden behind a parked car, watching them. It should have hurt more than it did, but all I felt was numbness. Then she looked up. Our eyes met across the street. Her smile faltered, just for a second. Then she looked away. Daniel said something that made her laugh again. and they walked inside together. I stood there for a long time, clutching the grocery bag until my knuckles turned white. When I finally walked away, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was haunted. Not by what she'd done, but by the version of myself I'd become because of it. That night, I opened the notebook again, read the entries until I could almost hear her voice saying the words, and somewhere between the lines, I started to see it. The pattern, the shift, the slow erosion of who we used to be. It wasn't just her fault. It wasn't just mine. It was both of us, feeding off insecurity, fear, and silence, until trust became surveillance and love became control. That realization didn't make it easier, but it made it real. And maybe that's the only closure you ever really get. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the recording on loop, the one of her laughter echoing in the background, the clinking of glasses, the faint murmur of his voice. Every time I heard her say his name, something inside me tightened. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. I'd built an entire life around someone I thought I knew, down to the way she stirred her coffee, and yet here she was, belonging to someone else when the lights went dim. The next morning, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her side. Her pillow still had that subtle indentation from her head, and I found myself tracing it with my fingertips, like it was something sacred. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like the last physical imprint of the version of her I used to love. When she came home that evening, she acted like nothing had changed. She tossed her bag on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and smiled at me from the doorway. "Hey," she said casually, as if she hadn't been erasing me piece by piece. "Hey." My voice cracked just slightly. She noticed. "You okay?" I nodded, even smiled, because that's what people do when they're too tired to start a war. She came closer, leaned down, and pressed her lips against my forehead. It was mechanical, almost polite. "I missed you today." I almost laughed. Missed me? I wanted to ask what she missed. The idea of me, or the comfort of knowing someone still waited for her when the other man couldn't. But instead, I just said, "I missed you too." And it was the most honest lie I'd ever told. That night, I couldn't bring myself to touch her. She slid into bed, curling toward me, her hand resting on my chest like a claim. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep while her breathing slowed, rhythmic and peaceful. My mind, though, was running through timelines, piecing together every excuse she'd ever made, every night out with friends, every sudden shower when she got home, every time she smiled at her phone and said, "Just work stuff." It was all there, right in front of me. I just never wanted to see it. The next few days passed like a performance. We had dinner, laughed, even watched a movie together. She was good at pretending, and I became even better. But the air between us felt different now. There was a tension that hummed beneath the small talk. She started noticing me watching her a little too long, asking questions that seemed harmless but weren't. Then one evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the table. I shouldn't have looked. I'd promised myself I wouldn't. But curiosity isn't always a choice. The message was from him. Short, simple. "I can't stop thinking about you." My throat went dry. A few seconds later, another one. "Does he suspect anything?" I froze. She came out wrapped in a towel, just as I locked the screen again and set the phone back exactly how it was. "Dinner?" she asked, shaking out her hair, oblivious. I nodded. "Sure." She smiled and kissed me, tasting like mint and steam, and for a second I almost kissed her back. Almost. That night, when she fell asleep again, I sat in the dark, watching the faint rise and fall of her chest. I realized something. She wasn't mine anymore, and maybe she hadn't been for a long time. But letting go of her wasn't the hard part. The hard part was accepting that she'd chosen to betray me in silence, knowing how much I trusted her. And that silence, that calm, careful silence, it was worse than any confession. Over the next week, I stopped asking where she was going, stopped checking her phone, stopped pretending to care about her lies. Instead, I focused on watching her unravel, because eventually, people who live double lives start to slip. It started small. She forgot her phone once before leaving. Then she came home late with her makeup smudged, claiming she'd had wine with friends, except her friend posted a story from another city that same night. Then one morning, she called in sick to work, but left the apartment anyway, and I followed. She walked fast, her coat pulled tight, hands buried in her pockets. The city around her buzzed, traffic, chatter, the low hum of life that didn't care about anyone's heartbreak. I stayed far enough not to be noticed, watching her disappear into a small cafe on the corner of Madison and 3rd. Through the window, I saw him, the same man from the photo, clean cut, smiling like the world revolved around her. They sat close, too close, their fingers brushing across the table like magnets. Something inside me went still. It wasn't rage or sorrow, it was a kind of cold, detached understanding. I'd been replaced, cleanly, quietly. I turned away before she could see me, walked home slowly, the wind biting at my face, and realized I didn't need proof anymore. I'd already seen enough. That night, I cooked dinner, set the table, lit a candle. When she came home, she looked startled to find everything waiting. "What's this?" she asked, smiling uncertainly. "Just thought we should have a nice dinner," I said. "Feels like we haven't really talked lately." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, okay." We ate mostly in silence. Every now and then, she'd glance at me like she was trying to read what I knew. I kept my voice calm, my expression neutral. Halfway through, I looked up and said softly, "Are you happy?" She froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy with me?" Her fork clinked against the plate. "Why are you asking that?" "I just want to know." She looked down. Her lips parted, then closed again. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "I don't know." And there it was. The truth I'd been running from. Not shouted, not screamed, just quietly dropped between us like a confession too fragile to hold. I nodded. "Thank you for being honest." She looked up, startled, like she expected me to fight, to argue, to beg. But I didn't. I just stood up, took her plate, and said, "I think I understand now." When I went to bed that night, I felt something strange. Not peace exactly, but a kind of release. Because sometimes the most painful thing isn't losing someone. It's realizing they were already gone long before you noticed. The next morning, she was gone before I woke up. No note this time, no text, just silence, the kind that seeps into every corner of a room until it feels like the walls are breathing with it. Her closet door hung open, half empty. The soft perfume she always wore lingered faintly in the air, like a ghost that didn't realize it was one. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the empty space she left behind. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I just existed. It's strange how quickly a home becomes a stranger when the person who filled it disappears. For a while, I thought maybe she'd come back, that she'd realize what she'd done, what we'd lost. But days turned into weeks, and the only thing that came through that door was the sound of the wind pushing against it. Life started to blur after that. Work, meals, sleep, everything fell into a quiet pattern. The world outside went on as if nothing had happened. People laughed on sidewalks, coffee brewed in the mornings, and the city lights still flickered like they always had. But to me, everything felt slightly off, as if I was watching my own life through glass. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos of us, the first trip we took together, the lazy Sundays, the way she looked at me when I made her laugh. For a moment, I forgot about everything that came after, the lies, the messages, the betrayal. For a moment, she was still mine. But then the screen dimmed and her smile disappeared into black. I went to her social media a few days later. She hadn't posted anything new. Her last photo was still the one of us, arms wrapped around each other, pretending forever was something real. I stared at it for a long time before finally deleting her from everything. It wasn't anger. It was mercy. For both of us. A few months passed. I moved to a smaller apartment across town. It was quiet, plain, nothing special, but it was mine. Some nights I'd catch myself checking the time she used to get home, or looking at my phone out of habit, expecting a message that never came. Healing isn't cinematic. It's not a montage of self-improvement or late-night epiphanies. It's dull, repetitive, like sanding down a sharp edge over and over until it stops cutting you every time you touch it. And eventually, I stopped bleeding. One evening, I was out getting coffee when I saw her again. It had been nearly a year. She was sitting by the window of a different cafe, laughing with someone else. Her hair was shorter now, her smile just the same. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and chose not to. Either way, I didn't look away. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel longing. Just this quiet recognition that she was a chapter that ended exactly how it was supposed to. We were never meant to destroy each other. We just didn't know when to stop trying to hold on. I left before she could notice. Stepped into the cold evening air, the streetlights stretching long shadows across the pavement. And for the first time in a long while, I felt light. Because the truth is, sometimes closure isn't a conversation or an apology. Sometimes it's just acceptance that not everything broken needs fixing, that some people walk out not to hurt you, but because they were never meant to stay. I walked home that night with my hands in my pockets, the sound of the city soft and alive around me. For once, I didn't check my phone, didn't wonder where she was or who she was with. I just kept walking, one step at a time, into a life that finally belonged to me again. And maybe that's the real freedom. What does it mean to truly let someone go? Is it the absence of their presence or the acceptance of their truth? When trust breaks, do we ever rebuild it, or do we simply learn to live without it? How many times do we mistake possession for love, and how many of us are brave enough to stop chasing ghosts? In the quiet aftermath of betrayal, who do we really grieve? Them, or the version of ourselves that believed they'd never leave?